Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Fieldbinder, and I am the event coordinator at Diversified Insurance Solutions, a division of ABRC. I would like to welcome you all to this afternoon's program to learn a little bit more about preventing sexual harassment in the workplace. Before I turn the mic over to today's presenter, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. First, everyone is muted in listen-only mode. We have a lot of content to cover this afternoon, so this will help us keep to our designated time frame. We definitely encourage questions, so please feel free to type them in the questions box throughout the program as we reserve time at the end of this presentation to answer any questions you may have. We will try our best to get through all of them, but if for some reason we aren't able to get to your questions or we run out of time, we will definitely send it to you within the next few days, along with the recording of this webinar, as well as the presentation itself. Also, if you haven't noticed already, in the handout sections, I've attached today's presentations that you can download and follow along with. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Catherine Weber. Catherine is an attorney and principal in the Cincinnati, Ohio office of Jackson Lewis. Jackson Lewis was named the 2017 Employment Law Management Law Firm of the Year and ranked in the first tier nationally in the category of labor employment litigation. Catherine brings a sophisticated yet easy to understand advice on how to handle and defend against sexual harassment claims. From helping her clients analyze options and making recommendations on how to handle employee relation issues to representing clients in complex discrimination cases, Catherine always provides creative solutions and passionate advocacy for her clients. She frequently provides training seminars for employers on how to formulate and enforce effective personal policies to avoid and minimize employment law issues. She has appeared numerous times on nationally syndicated radio talk shows, has published articles in state newsletters and magazines, and serves as chairman of the board of directors of the Employers Resource Association, a Cincinnati-based organization providing companies in a 3-state area with HR advice. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Weber.
Thanks so much, Margaret, and thank you for having me. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about how to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And, you know, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I love training on this issue. I am actually in the midst of a tour for a particular client where I'm going all over the country and actually training live for all their employees from the very top to the very bottom. And you know, I think it's important that we understand that although we might be used to training in one particular method, maybe we've got a computer program that we like to use, some software, something that we perhaps, you know, put together online. But I think it's really important, especially in this day and age, that we have some live high-touch training, if you will, where you're in the room with the employees, where you can create a conversation and really open people up to talking about this issue. Now, the presentation that we're going to go through today really is designed for HR professionals and HR managers and managers of all sorts, really. It's not appropriate for non-manager level employees because it contains some information that's just not necessary. We do have a separate version of this training that is designed for your non-management level employees. And as I said, it's really important that when you're training your folks that you train from the very top to the very bottom and you make sure that you catch everybody. You can even do some remote sessions for those who are unable to join at appointed times. But with that said, let's get going and kick it off here. So the topics that we're going to cover today, we're going to cover a wide range of topics. We're going to talk about first establishing a baseline, okay? Because everybody thinks that they know everything that there is to know about sexual harassment. You know, I've been in the business forever, I get it. But there are really some nuances and some nitty-gritty issues that might surprise you. We'll then quickly talk about the Equal Employment Opportunity Law, and we won't spend too much time giving the legal definitions and dwelling there. Instead, what I like to do is actually put those legal principles into place. So we're going to apply those legal definitions and principles to a set of workplace scenarios, and we'll go through those, we'll talk about those, and see how they might apply in each situation. We'll then talk about when an employer or a manager can be held liable for sexual harassment. or any form of discrimination or harassment. We'll talk about bystanders and the important role that they can bring in terms of trying to make sure that you bring awareness to the issue in your organization and you help create that culture where everybody feels comfortable and everybody feels empowered to be the best employee they can be. We'll talk about expectations for managers when a complaint is made, and then we'll do a quick takeaway slide. So let's start with some myth busting here, if you will. So here are a couple questions to get us started. True or false? You can't have a claim of harassment if you merely witnessed harassment, but the harassment wasn't directed specifically at you. Now, if we were sitting here live doing this, we'd have a nice, robust conversation, and I'd be giving you all kinds of live examples here. But the answer to this, think about it. If you're in a room and you've got a manager who comes in, and let's say I'm the manager and I don't like working with men, okay? And I have been assigned a male assistant, and it just drives me crazy that I have this male assistant who has to work with me. And I am not very nice to him. I make terribly sexist comments to him. You know, I don't make any secrets whatsoever about the fact that I don't appreciate the fact that I have to deal with a man. I would much prefer to surround myself with other women. Now, if we're in an environment where there are other men in that room, although I'm directing my comments specifically at my male assistant, the other men in the room can hear it. And certainly I am targeting my comments at this person because of sex. So I am, laying the foundation, if you will, for a sexually hostile work environment. And the other people in the room, the other males, although they're not the target of my comments, they have to feel equally uncomfortable with the prospect of the fact that I'm their boss and I don't like working with men. So for that reason, you don't have to actually be the target of the comments or the conduct. If you're a witness to it, you could potentially have a claim. So the answer to that is false. You can either be the target or you can be a witness and you can still have a claim. Here's the second one. True or false? A manager with an anger management problem who yells at everybody may be a bad manager, but without more is not an unlawful harasser. Now, I am here to tell you people get this question wrong all the time. And the setup is this. So let's say I'm your manager and I come in every morning, and with respect to all of you, if we were all in the same room live, I come in, the first person I come to, I knock their papers off their desk. The second person, I kick their chair. The third person, I berate and I discipline them loudly in front of everybody. The next person, I blame them for every mistake I ever made in front of everybody. The next person, I curse at like I'm a sailor, and I do that to everybody that's in the room. Everybody that reports to me has to deal with my harsh, unfair treatment. Now, the question is, clearly I'm a bad manager. Clearly I shouldn't be a manager, right? But without more, am I an unlawful harasser? And the answer to that question is, without more, I am not. So no, I'm not an unlawful harasser. And the reason for that is this. When we're talking about discrimination and we're talking about harassment of the unlawful variety, we're not just talking about a manager who treats somebody badly or unfairly. We are talking about a manager who targets people, makes these comments, or engages in conduct directed at people because of a protected category. And if I treat everybody the same way, equally badly, I am what we call an equal opportunity harasser, okay? I am not picking on anybody because of a protected category. I am just treating everybody horribly. I shouldn't have my job, but under those circumstances, and albeit it's going to be a really ugly defense, one that nobody's going to like you for, under those circumstances, there's not going to be a viable claim for unlawful discrimination or unlawful harassment. Next question. True or false? An employee must follow the chain of command when reporting harassment and take it to the supervisor first. Well, that one is clearly false. We know that can't possibly, just thinking about it from a reasonable person standard, it's like if your boss is a bad actor, will it really do you any good to bring to the boss's attention that you believe that he's harassing or discriminating against you? The answer is no, and the law recognizes that. So no, you don't have to go to your your chain of command when reporting harassment. If that information is going up, it doesn't have to go to the boss. Maybe it goes to HR. Maybe it goes to legal. Maybe it goes to your compliance officer. Once it gets up into a manager's hands or an HR person's hands, then that knowledge gets attributed to the company, and it's just like the president was in the room and watching it. All right. True or false, an employee can be disciplined for making a good faith harassment claim that is found after investigation to be unfounded? Well, the answer to that is false. Okay, so if an employee comes in, he might have a good faith basis to believe that, yes, he is being discriminated against based on his sex. But after the investigation, the employer might say, you know what, I do think that your boss behaved inappropriately and I'm going to issue discipline. Or after the investigation, the company might say, you know what, I can't really determine based on all the facts before me whether or not a violation of my policy occurred. So I'm going to remind everybody of our policies and our expectations, but I'm not going to make, I am not in a position really to conclude that your concerns were substantiated. And then, of course, the third option is after the investigation, the company might say, all right, I've looked into everything. I've talked to all the witnesses. I've looked at all the documents. And while, I completely understand how you feel like, you were treated unfairly, you have to understand there are two sides to every story and you don't always have all the perspective. So let me share some perspective with you. And based upon that perspective, I'm here to tell you that I don't believe there was a violation of policy, regardless of the outcome of that. Regardless of whether the employer says, yeah, you've got a violation, no, I can't tell whether you have a violation, or absolutely not, there's no violation. If the employee comes forward in good faith, you can't discipline them based on coming forward, okay? If you do, you're going to find yourself facing a retaliation claim, and a very serious one at that. All right, next question. If you're engaged in a consensual romantic relationship with your supervisor and your coworkers feel like you're receiving favoritism, that's the basis for a sex discrimination claim. True or false? That one's false. Okay, here's a perfect example. For those of you who watched Friends back in the day, or maybe you still watch it on Netflix, you'll remember that there was a character, Rachel Green, right? And Rachel Green is this beautiful executive who works for a department store, and in one of the seasons, she has the opportunity to hire an administrative assistant, and she hires this young man who is very, very handsome, and that's why she hires him, which is a bad idea. But anyway, they fall in love, they get into a consensual romantic relationship, and there's absolutely nothing unlawful about that. But, if you put yourself in the position of, now you're this Tad is the character's name, you're Tad's colleagues, and every day you see Rachel and Tad come into work late together, and every day you see Rachel and Tad leave work early together, and every day Rachel and Tad take an extended lunch break together, and every day, every opportunity when Rachel has to go to Paris, she takes Tad. And, every day when, there's an assignment in the most undesirable place in the country, you're the one that gets to go. So under those circumstances, of course, all the colleagues are looking at each other going, this isn't fair, that's not right, she shouldn't be able to do that. They're very distracted, they're not working, they're probably out looking for other jobs. All those things may be true, but they're all being similarly disadvantaged based on what? They're being similarly disadvantaged because Rachel loves Tad. And that's not a protected category, so while it may be unfair, it's not unlawful. Now, the EEOC would take the position that if the circumstances were slightly different and Rachel were engaging in a sexual affair with a lot of the male folks who report to her, that could be unlawful hostile work environment because, the message that Rachel is giving to the male workers is that if you want to go get ahead in this company, you have to sleep with the boss. And that, of course, under those facts would create the foundation for a discrimination claim. All right, so let's look at the definitions really quickly here. When we are talking about unlawful discrimination, we are talking about a situation where the employee belongs to a protected category, they're qualified for the job, they suffer some adverse employment action. The key is because of the protected category. Now, no discrimination exists if the employer takes whatever the adverse action is for some legitimate business reason that doesn't have anything to do with the protected category. Here are the federally protected categories, and you can see that there are many. Some of these mean more than what you might think just based on the word itself. For instance, sex. We can have situations where we have, a man discriminating against a woman, or a woman discriminating against a man, or we could have same-sex sex discrimination or sexual harassment. We can even, in some jurisdictions, have situations where someone brings a hostile work environment claim based on sex under the theory that they are transgender. In other words, I am born a woman, but I identify as a man. So some of these words do mean other things other than just the traditional notion, the traditional definition. And most of these categories will allow for a reverse claim to be made. For instance, you could certainly have a reverse race or reverse color, reverse sex. You can't have a reverse age, though, under federal law. Under federal law, the protected category is 40 and over. Now, there is at least one state, I believe it's Florida, that protects folks even if they're under 40. But at least on the federal level and in most jurisdictions, you have to be 40 years of age or older. And I'll share a little secret with you. When I started practicing about 30 years ago, and I started working on my very first age discrimination case, I had to look up the definition of who was a protected person under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. And I look at the law and I go, oh my gosh, you have to be 40 in order to be protected. Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't think that anymore. I think of 40 as the new 20, right? 40 is not old at all, but that is the minimum threshold age that you have to be in order to be protected under this Age Discrimination and Employment Act. The only ones really that don't permit any sort of a reverse claim, certainly a pregnancy would not, disability does not, genetic information does not. And I think that's really about the only ones that would not permit a reverse claim. So sexual harassment in terms of the legal definition is this. It's unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature when the submission to the conduct is either explicitly or implicitly a condition of your job, or the submission or rejection of the conduct is used as the basis for an employment decision, or the conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. Now, that just sounds like a whole lot of legal gobbledygook, right? And so people get mired down in the mud there. Let's unpack that definition. So there are only two types of sexual harassment, and the first is called quid pro quo harassment. Quid pro quo is fancy for fancy Latin, if you will, for this, for that, okay? It's sexual blackmail. And we do not see this type of sexual harassment that much in your ordinary employment setting. Now, certainly, the social media, Facebook and all the news feeds are all filled with stories of how these high-level media stars or high-level executives in these huge companies, have been accused of this variety of sexual harassment. But for the most part, in the ordinary world in which we live, we don't see that much. In order for there to be a quid pro quo sexual harassment case, the person who is engaging in the bad behavior actually has to be a manager or someone who has the ability to control terms or conditions of employment. Without that bad actor can't blackmail the person with anything, right? They have nothing to bargain with. The other form of sexual harassment is what we call a hostile work environment claim. And this is the type of harassment claim that we see the most frequently. And a hostile work environment claim can be based either on, sex, like what we're talking about here, or it can be based on any of the protected categories, though. And that's really important to keep in mind because while right now the media has us captivated with stories of sexual harassment, that is not the only form of harassment, unlawful harassment that's out there. It could be a hostile work environment based on race or national origin or disability or pregnancy, you name it. It could be any of those other types of protected categories that could give rise to a hostile work environment claim. But since we're talking about sexual harassment, let's run through the elements. First, you have to have unwelcome comments or conduct. Then the comments, you have to be able to show that they were based on sex. So the comments or the conduct were targeted at the person, not because they're gullible, but because of their sex. You have to be able to show that the comments or conduct were severe or pervasive, and that means they were really, really bad, or they happen all the time. You also have to show that the comments or conduct were offensive to the person who's complaining and that they are offensive to a reasonable person. So you have to be able to show both. You have to show that the comments or conduct were so bad that they interfered with the ability of the complaining person to perform their work, and it created this offensive, intimidating, or hostile work environment. Now, the way I like to describe this really is envision, if you will, a glass jar and then a bag of marbles beside it, and every marble in my bag represents some unwelcome comment or conduct. So maybe one of the marbles that I throw in the jar is a sexist joke, another one is a brush up against an employee, another one is a double entendre, another one is, you know, a screensaver, you know, that's sexually oriented, another is me, you know, repeatedly asking you out for dates, another is, you get the idea. And we fill that jar, we keep throwing marbles in the jar, and eventually when the marbles spill out over top of the jar, we've got a situation where now the atmosphere is severe and pervasive. It's potentially creating an offensive, intimidating, and a legally actionable hostile work environment. Does that mean we want to wait until all the marbles in the jar, you know, reach the top? No, of course not, because every marble that gets thrown in that jar is one step further away from your workplace being able to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable, everybody feels respected, everybody feels empowered, and your goal is that, because harassment and discrimination is the exact opposite of that kind of workplace. And, you know, I tell folks, you know, you want to be in a situation where you've created a workplace where people trust each other, and they like doing what their job is with you. And hopefully if you do this right, you know, they'll feel comfortable saying to their, you know, to their older child, or maybe to a best friend, yeah, you know, I work at this company, it's wonderful. They have an opening, you'd be perfect for it. I think you should apply. And that's kind of the litmus test. You know, would you send your mom there to work in the same company or not? If not, you got to ask yourself why. So who can create a hostile work environment? Essentially anybody. A manager can create it, an executive, a coworker, a client or a customer, a vendor, and, you know, managers can create a hostile work environment for each other. Subordinate employees, non-management employees can create hostile work environments for each other. Managers can create it for subordinates. Subordinates can even create a hostile work environment for their manager. Because again, in order to create this kind of liability, it doesn't require that the bad actor control terms and conditions of employment for the victim. All right, so where do these laws apply? It's easy to understand that they apply at work or any place where you send the person to perform work. It's also easy to understand how they apply in work-related functions, like at a company picnic or a celebration of some sort. But it's not so easy for people to wrap their head around the fact that these workplace laws can have an impact on the situation when your employees are gathered together at a non-company sanctioned event and bad behavior occurs. So the setup is this. Let's say that I'm somebody's manager out there on the phone. Now, Margaret, I'm your manager. And, you know, you're going to have this wonderful party, and it's on the weekend, and it's going to be a pool party, and you're going to bring in, you know, the best bourbon, and you know, we're going to grill steaks. It's going to be a blast. And we all show up at Margaret's house this weekend. We all work at the same company. We all show up at Margaret's house, and I get drunk as a skunk. And eventually, okay, so this is going to be a same-sex case. So I'm sorry, Margaret, but you're going to be my guinea pig, if you will. But this is going to be a same-sex case, and I start hitting on Margaret. And I keep hitting on her, and I keep hitting on her, and I keep hitting on her. And Margaret's going, no, 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 I don't want any part of that. And eventually I pass out on the lawn chair, and she avoids me. Wonderful. Until Monday when she hears me coming down the hallway. Now, what's Margaret thinking? I guarantee you she's going, oh my gosh, I hope she doesn't remember what happened at my party. Or she's going, maybe she's coming to apologize. Won't that be great? Or maybe she's going, oh no, maybe she's going to start hitting on me again. Well, think about this. What if Margaret has an evaluation coming up on Friday, and she goes to that evaluation, and she normally gets all 5s, and on Friday she gets all 3s? What do you think Margaret is going to think the reason is for her decline in her performance evaluation? You got it. She's going to think it must be because she rejected my sexual advances. So you can see in that scenario that it doesn't have anything, the law is going to apply here, and it doesn't matter that we're not in the same, you know, we're not at work, we're not at a company sanctioned event. In fact, we're at a completely unsanctioned event, right? But our relationships are what matter, and my bad conduct has now infected our work relationship. And so when we get back to work on Monday, you can see how Margaret might be concerned about working for me. She's going to filter every negative comment or every negative thing that happens to her as some evidence that it was because she rejected my advances. So you can see there that, we have to be really careful, when it comes to conduct that occurs outside the workplace, because it can come in and infect the workplace and create liability for us. Retaliation. So retaliation is also prohibited under the law, and the law says that it's unlawful to retaliate against an employee because the employee makes a complaint of unlawful discrimination or harassment, or they assist someone, or they participate in an investigation. And the employee's got to be able to show that they engaged in this protected activity. In other words, they made the complaint, or they assisted, or they participated. That the employer knew it, and the employee suffered some adverse employment action because of engaging in the protected activity. Now, no retaliation exists if the employer took the action based on a legitimate business reason and has a good explanation for any closeness in time. Here's the tricky part. When it comes to retaliation, this is really challenging for employers, because normally when we're talking about an adverse action, we're thinking about if it's a discrimination claim or a harassment claim, we're looking for the official stamp, if you will, the official seal of company action. And we see that in a demotion or a failure to promote or a termination or a suspension or a decrease in pay. But when we're talking about retaliation, the definition of an adverse action is different. The definition in the context of a retaliation claim is, was the conduct something that would tend to dissuade a reasonable person from complaining? Wow, that is a broad definition. And you can see how that might even encompass a situation where someone complains and their colleagues find out about it, and they all go, oh, don't sit with us, we don't want to be around you, because next thing you know, you're going to HR on us. Or I don't want to be with that person because I'm afraid she'll accuse me of sexual harassment. Would that kind of behavior tend to dissuade a reasonable person from complaining? You betcha. So you've really got to be on heightened alert when it comes to preventing retaliation, because it's very challenging sometimes to navigate those waters. All right, so let's put all this into action and see how it applies, if you will. So here's a question for you. Here's a scenario. Will and John are using their personal cell phones to Snapchat and text each other sexually oriented jokes and off-color YouTube videos during the workday. Although their phones are set on silent, when one of them bursts out laughing for no apparent reason, you know what just happened. Now, here's my question. Is this a workplace problem? One that the human resources team or the company should jump out in front of and try and stop? And you'll see here, I've given the perspective of some of the folks in my training sessions who share their opinions with me, but really think about it. Think about that scenario. Do you think that that's a workplace situation that we would want to allow to continue? Well, the answer is we wouldn't. Okay? And it doesn't matter that they're not sharing the jokes and the off-color videos with other females, and it doesn't matter that they're using their own personal devices. It doesn't matter that they think they're being private, because the fact of the matter is the way they behave lets us know everybody knows what's going on, and it might as well be up on the PowerPoint screen. Do we want to wait until somebody complains? Oh, heck no. Because, we have to appreciate the fact that not everybody would feel comfortable in that work environment. So we would want to go to Will and John and say, here's the situation, you need to knock that off. And that ignores the fact that they should be working instead of training these sexually oriented jokes and YouTube videos. Here's another one. Anne recently graduated at the top of her class and has joined your engineering department. The rest of the team are all male engineers who have been with the company for many years. When Anne tries to add to team discussion, she's quickly dismissed by her male coworkers and told she doesn't understand company processes and how we get things done around here. Now, the male engineers also often go out to lunch together, but they don't go out of their way to invite Anne. Is this a workplace problem? Well, think about that. For those of you on the call who have maybe daughters who are of working age and they're out there in the workplace, and maybe your daughter is Anne, what advice would you give your daughter, Anne, in this situation? I mean, certainly you say, Anne, you need to try and make some inroads with the group. Maybe it's just you're the newcomer, you're the probie, if you will. You need to make some relationships and build their trust, and then you'll be accepted, and they'll be very willing to listen to all these great ideas you have. But if this goes on, Anne, then maybe you're going to have to involve your manager or human resources. And if it continues, even after Ann tries to build some relationships and get some credibility with the group, what's Ann and her parents going to think? Well, yeah, you got it. Maybe since Ann is top of her class, maybe since the company thought she obviously had value to bring to the organization, and since her colleagues are all dissing her, not even giving her the time of day, maybe it's because she's a woman. So, in order to minimize the risks associated with this, you would want to jump in and you would want to find the naturally born leader in this group, you know, the person who everybody tends to listen to, the person who has influence or sway, and you want to kind of bring them in and find out what's going on and then engage them as your partner in solving the problem, right? And of course, if you can't do that, then you're going to have to be more direct, but certainly I'd go in there first and try and fix it from the inside out and then go at it from the exterior. But yeah, this is a workplace problem. I'm not going to tell you that this is in and of itself unlawful, because it's not, but I would say that this is worth a couple marbles in my sexual harassment jar. Here's another one. Christine's a new employee and she loves dressing like a popular reality TV star, and she emulates her style when dressing for work. Christine mentions to her manager that some of her colleagues comment about her clothes and leer. Is this a problem? Now you can see some of the, again, we've given you the comments that some of the folks share with us. And some people go, oh yeah, absolutely. And other people go, oh, she chose to dress like that, so what does she expect, right? And other people blame Christy, again, you know, Christine, based on how she's dressing. And, you know, the answer to this really is it's two problems, okay? One, Christine should not be dressing that way. She needs to dress appropriately for the work environment. And if you have a dress code, then the art of being a great HR manager or a great leader is to be able to talk to Christine and go, this is my dress code over here on the right, and this is you. Let's see if we can and work together, and I'll help you. If you need it, try and make sure that you make better wardrobe choices. But regardless of that, Christine, you know, we're going to make sure that we talk to the folks who are in your group, and we're not going to permit them to, you know, to make comments and leer and that kind of behavior. That's not appropriate, because, you know, at the end of the day, so here's the way this goes. Christine may wear shirts that are cut way too low and skirts that are hiked way up too high, but she does not check her right to work in a workplace free of sexual harassment. So we've got that, you know, that tension, if you will, between the poor wardrobe choices that she's making and, you know, her coworkers and the way they're behaving. But at the end of the day, that's not going to save the employer. So we need to make sure that we jump in there and manage that. All right. Lucy's on a popular online dating app, Tinder. During breaks, she and Jean often sit at each other's cubes and peruse potential romantic prospects for Lucy and critique their appearances. Lucy is not shy to share some of her more wild details of her dating life with Jean. Is this a workplace problem? Wow. Yes, indeed. You know, the whole social media and all the apps and all the websites that are out there, they have made our managers' lives really challenging. But this represents you know, a set of circumstances which we see frequently, you know, some variation of this in what we do here at Jackson Lewis in helping employers deal with issues in the workplace. But let's think about it. So number one, you know, they're on break, okay, so you're not losing work time. But number two, they're in a cube farm, right? And there is no privacy in a cube farm, none. So whoever's sitting on the other side of that cube or on the left or the right of that cube, although Lucy and Jean might think this is drop dead funny, hilarious, and they might be enjoying their break time immensely, the problem is that others on the other side of that cube might not feel the same. And what we might face is someone who comes forward and says, oh, too much information. They continue to do this all the time. I can't stand it. I feel uncomfortable. It's interfering with my ability to get the job done. I feel like I'm being, you know, subjected to a sexually hostile work environment. And that would be a man probably who would say that, right? Since it's two women who are talking about other men's profiles out here on Tinder. Or sometimes the way we get these type of claims, they arise when someone says, you know what? I am someone, you know, I hate to, I'm not a prude, but I am deeply immersed in my faith. I'm a Catholic, and it drives me crazy and just makes my hair stand on end to hear these two go on like this. And they might claim that they're being subjected to a hostile work environment based on religion. Okay, So you never know how you're going to get hit with this kind of claim, but you don't want to wait until somebody complains, because by then their conduct, it wasn't just one day of crazy behavior in the cube. Now it may be 30 days of crazy behavior in the cube, right? And the more we allow this to go on, the greater our potential is for risk of workplace claims, right? Claims of hostile work environment. So this would be something that we would want to get in front of. If there's somebody out there on the other side of the cube that doesn't appreciate this, yeah, that's probably a couple marbles in the jar. Mary and Paul are co-workers who dated for several months. When Mary broke up with him, Paul posted and tagged a revealing private photo Mary had previously texted to him onto his Instagram and Twitter feed with the hashtags #ho and the #skank. Mary came to her manager on Monday morning and demanded that Paul be fired because some of their coworkers follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter. Is this a workplace problem? Of course it's a workplace problem, okay? I mean, if we pretend like we're Mary right now and ding, off goes the phone and now everyone is looking at us naked, yeah, that's a workplace problem. Does it matter that Mary voluntarily took the picture when she was in this relationship with Paul? She voluntarily took the picture and she sent it to Paul? Doesn't matter. Does it matter that Paul's, lawfully in possession of the picture and he's chosen to share it with people on his Twitter account and his Instagram account? Doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter? Because there are people out there in the same room, co-workers of Mary and Paul, who are now looking at Mary naked. And yeah, that is the setup for a terrible sexually hostile work environment claim if we don't jump in and do something. So if Mary comes to me and says, tells me what's going on, and I go, okay, Mary, I am so sorry that you're having to deal with this. I appreciate the fact that this is wildly embarrassing for you. Let me tell you, I'm going to jump in front of this right now. Do you want to continue to work here today, or would you like to take the day off, and I'll pay you for it while I kind of, batten down the hatches and get everything under control? And I'm going to let Mary make that choice, right? Because that's the compassionate thing to do. Then I'm going to bring in Paul, and I'm going to go, Paul, don't even try and deny it, buddy, because I follow you on Instagram and Twitter too. I got it on my phone too. All right? So tell me what you were thinking. And if Paul says to me, you know what, she deserves it. She is, exactly what I called her. I think of it as a public service announcement. It was my photos. She gave them to me voluntarily, willingly. I can do with them whatever I want. And if you didn't like that photo, wait till you see the one that comes out at noon and then every hour on the hour after that. Well, my response to that is, okay, Paul, I hear what you're saying, buddy. Whether you're right or wrong, you've got to go be successful someplace else. You can't work for me. Okay, I'm going to terminate Paul's employment because I cannot tolerate the risk that he'll continue to engage in this terrible behavior. Now, on the other hand, if Paul says, oh my gosh, Catherine, I am so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm sure that I wasn't. I was heartbroken. I was drinking. I wasn't thinking about the people who follow me, on Twitter and on Instagram at work. I am so, so sorry. What can I do to help fix this? All right. Well, now I've got a situation where I've got to look at this and I've got to go, all right, if my obligation is really to take reasonable steps to stop it when I find it and to take reasonable steps to prevent it from happening again, recognizing that I don't have to be perfect, has Paul admitted the conduct? Yes. Has Paul acknowledged that it was wrong? Yes. Does Paul appreciate the impact on the work environment? Yes. Do I think that Paul's likely going to continue to engage in this behavior? No. Under those circumstances, if Paul hasn't engaged in prior behavior like this, I'm probably going to give Paul a first and final written warning and attach some additional consequences to it. Maybe he's going to get a week off without pay, suspension. But in that scenario, you can see where the amount of discipline that comes out of this is going to depend upon the severity of what's going on and his past behavior and how he reacts when he's confronted. And we always want to confront our folks, when we're doing this work in this type of area. We want to always give our people the opportunity to respond to any accusations that are made against them. All right, here's another. Steve, Paul, and their coworkers freely discuss current events and hot-button political issues. Today, Steve and Paul were sharing an article posted on Fox News about this year's Sports Illustrated bathing suit edition, in which the swimsuit models are posed with empowering and identifying words written on their otherwise naked bodies in order to align with the Me Too movement. Steve and Paul were making fun of the models in the magazine. Monica interpreted Steve and Paul's comments as being dismissive and disrespectful towards women who complain of sexual harassment. Is this a workplace problem? Let's think about that. The answer is, yes, principally for the reasons expressed in letter C, that answer there, that the comments may not amount to harassment, but they're potentially divisive, not in alignment with the company's mission, and aren't helping the company serve its customers, right? And, you know, in this scenario, the problem that we get into here is we live in a society where we are hyper-connected. I mean, everybody's out there on social media. Everybody's got an opinion about everything. Everybody feels compelled to share their opinion with everybody else. And while we can reach out and talk to people across the world, we suffer from this incredible empathy deficit. We can't seem to understand, we don't recognize, we're not aware that the opinions that we hold might not be the same opinions that other people hold. We can't seem to be empathetic enough to understand that not everybody thinks the same way we do. And so when we share things like this and other people misinterpret our comments, that can be very disruptive, right? And I will tell you that I work with some of the finest labor employment attorneys in the country. And there are people that I work with who, if they called me in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. and said, I ran out of gas, Catherine, can you come help me? I would be there in a heartbeat. But I would also tell you that I probably wildly disagree with some of their political positions too. Doesn't make them a bad person, but just means that I'm respectful of the fact that not everybody thinks like me. Okay, and in this situation right now, we're talking about the Me Too movement, but I could roll the hands of the clock back a little bit, 5 years maybe. We'd be talking about all the calls that we would get in our office from employers who would say, Catherine, what do I do? I've got employees who are in my office complaining because some of their coworkers have Confederate flag bumper stickers in their cars that are parked on our lot. What do I do with that? Or maybe the conversation isn't about Confederate flags and the Dukes of Hazzard, because clearly that's what the folks were telling us was the explanation for it. Maybe we're talking not about the Me Too movement or Confederate flags. Maybe we're talking about whether ABC was right to fire Roseanne Barr. Maybe we're talking about whether you supported Obama or whether you supported Trump or whether you supported Hillary. Maybe we'd be talking about whether you should build a wall, maybe we'd be talking about whether, we should be drinking Starbucks coffee. All of these political hot topic issues are out there all over social media, and everybody's got an opinion, and again, everybody wants to share it with you, but they also all have this backdoor, trapdoor, or a remote link, if you will, to some of those protected categories, right? And so when we get into conversations that deal with those protected categories and our views on protected categories, we really start to venture into dangerous territory that can be very disruptive. And I like to tell folks, if I had won the lottery last night and won $1 million, I probably wouldn't be having this webinar today. But I am, and you're on this webinar for the same reason I am, because you need a paycheck to take care of yourself and the people that you love. So since we're all in this boat together, if you will, let's make it easy on each other. Okay? And some people might go, oh my gosh, well, what does that mean? Well, one way you could approach this is, think about the Thanksgiving Day dinner table. I'm sure, for those of you who still have, Thanksgiving Day dinner celebrations with your family, you probably remember as a kid that there was a rule you were taught. Your parents taught you there are two things you don't talk about at the Thanksgiving Day dinner table: religion and politics. Why? Because undoubtedly, if you got into that territory, somebody was going to get upset. These were divisive issues, and, Uncle Elmer was going to throw the napkin on the table. I'm out of here. And Aunt Carol was going to be right behind him, and so were all their kids. And before you knew it, this wonderful family celebration was going to blow up right in your face, and everybody would feel disrespected and unhappy, and that's not what we want. So in the workplace, I tell folks, consider following the Thanksgiving Day dinner table rule. Since we're all in the same boat together, we're all working because we need that paycheck to take care of ourselves and the people that we love. Let's follow the Thanksgiving Day dinner table rule and just don't comment. Don't get out there and get deep into conversations about these hot button political topics that have this connection, if you will, to these protected categories. Doesn't mean you can't have fun in the workplace. You absolutely can. Doesn't mean you can't talk about anything when you're at work. That's not true. You can talk about all kinds of things. But if you steer clear of those types of topics, those types of conversations, you'll do a lot to create a workplace where everybody feels respected. You'll raise that empathy, you'll raise that awareness, and it'll be a much better work environment. Now, the annual holiday dinner party is a snore, completely uneventful, but the same can't be said for the impromptu after party at a local bar. Yep, that's where a bunch of coworkers went and split the tab. Most of the employees became intoxicated, and the banter turned sexual quickly. The next day, Mary complained to HR that she was offended by some of the things that people were saying and doing. Mary explained that she didn't want to go at all, but her boss said that she should go and think of this as a team-building exercise. Is this a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. It's another example of how behavior outside of a work, an employer-sanctioned event off-site can bleed over into the workplace and infect the situation, right? So yeah, unfortunately, because the boss said, yeah, Mary, you should go, he led her to believe that that would be something he would expect of her. So now we've got a problem and we're going to have to investigate these circumstances. Anne Marie files an internal complaint with HR about sex discrimination that she's experiencing from the plant manager. The safety manager, who considers herself on friendly terms with Anne Marie, finds out about the complaint, warns Anne Marie that she's asking for trouble, and she had better watch her back. Is this a workplace problem? Yeah, absolutely it is, right? This sounds like classic retaliation to me, right? And you know what? Anne Marie knows it, and she files another complaint with HR against the safety manager for retaliating against her by making these threats in response to her original complaint against the plant manager. Can she do that? Absolutely she can. But after filing her complaint about the safety manager's retaliatory conduct, Anne Marie decides that she now has job security. She decides she'll get to work when she feels like it, and she's no longer going to come to work on Mondays. Can Anne Marie be disciplined for her bad behavior? Yes, she can, right? So if Anne Marie was on final written warning and she was about to point out and be terminated if she missed one more Monday, at work, and she misses that additional Monday because she thinks she's, somehow super protected from discipline, yeah, she can be fired. Why is that? Because it wouldn't be retaliatory, because we would not be taking action against Anne Marie because she filed or lodged complaints about the plant manager or the safety manager. We'd be taking action against her because she refused to follow the rules that we hold everybody accountable to and we require everybody else to follow, right? So just because she complains, that doesn't wrap her in some crazy cloak of invincibility, if you will. All right, let's talk about liability for employers and for managers. So we're going to talk first about when a company can be held liable for a manager's sexual harassment. When we're talking about a quid pro quo harassment claim, and the manager obviously is the bad guy, the employer is strictly liable, no questions asked. When we're talking about a hostile work environment claim and it's the manager who's the accused, the employer is strictly liable if it culminates in a tangible employment action. So somebody's demoted, terminated, or negatively reassigned. Now, if there's no tangible employment action, the employer is only presumed liable. That sounds really bad, doesn't it? But at least there's a defense. And the defense is this: there's no liability for the employer if the employer took reasonable steps to prevent the sexual harassment in the first place. Now, how would you show that? You'd show that by saying, look, here's my sexual harassment policy, here's my complaint procedure, here's the training that I do on a regular basis for all of my employees and for my managers, and here's what I have consistently done when people raise issues. That's how I would show that I, as the employer, took reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. The employer also has to show that they took reasonable steps to promptly address the sexual harassment in the workplace. So when the company heard of the bad behavior, did the company jump in immediately, promptly, and try to resolve the issue? Great if they did. Then they can mark that element off their list. And the last thing that the employer has to be able to show is they have to be able to show that the victimized employee unreasonably failed to complain or take advantage of the employer's preventative or corrective measures. All right, so let's put that into action. So let's say we've got a situation where a manager creates this sexually hostile work environment for a subordinate employee, and there's no tangible employment action. There's no demotion, termination, or reassignment. So we're looking at this affirmative defense. And let's say that the manager is, constantly making all these suggestive comments to the female subordinate employee and talking about his troubled marital life and leering at her and making comments maybe even asking her out on dates, making suggestive statements to her. And let's say that female employee goes, oh man, I am not going to put up with this nonsense, and I don't even want to complain. I don't want to go through the hassle of investigation. I'm just going to go find another job. And that employee resigns, okay, doesn't complain, just resigns. And 2 weeks later, you get a complaint letter, a threatening letter from plaintiff's counsel in town, and they say, hi, I represent your former employee, Mary, and Bob was sexually harassing her. He created a sexually hostile work environment, and you owe Mary big bucks. Let's look at that and see whether or not we can establish the affirmative defense and avoid liability. Well, did we take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment? Yes, we trained all our people. We've got a strong policy. We've got great consistency in terms of stepping in and taking action when it's necessary. Did we promptly address the sexual harassment in the workplace when we knew or should have known about it? Well, Mary never complained, so we win that point. All right, the victimized employee has to unreasonably fail to complain or otherwise take advantage of our policies and practices. Did Mary fail to complain? Yes, she did. Okay, check, check, and check. Even if the bad behavior happened, I'm not liable because I can show this affirmative defense to the sexual harassment claim. All right, employer wins. Now, let me change that. Let's say that Mary's a pretty strong-willed individual, and she doesn't take a whole lot of guff. And when the manager starts in his shenanigans on the first time that it happened, she goes, knock it off. I don't really appreciate that. Let's keep it professional. Of course, the manager doesn't listen, and he continues. And on the second occasion, she says, hey, buddy, I don't think you understood. I'm not interested. I don't like that. And if you don't knock it off, I'm going to call your wife. All right. He still doesn't get her. So the next time it happens, she goes, okay, that's it, technical foul. I'm calling your wife and I'm calling HR. And she does both. She comes to you and she complains. She tells you what's going on. You place that manager on an administrative leave of absence while you conduct an investigation. You conduct your investigation and you conclude that the bad behavior occurred and you fire him. Now, she has lost no pay, right? She's been taken care of. And 2 weeks later, you get that same threat letter from the plaintiff's counsel saying, hi, I represent Mary. She was subjected to a hostile work environment. You owe Mary big bucks. Huh, what do we say to that? Well, let's walk through the affirmative defense here. Did we take reasonable steps to prevent the harassment? Yes, we did. All the same reasons. Did we promptly address the sexual harassment in the workplace? Oh, yes, we did. We were the model employer. Now, can we show that Mary, the victimized employee, unreasonably failed to complain or take advantage of the preventative or corrective measures that we had in place? No, we can't. She came to us, promptly. So even though we were the model employer and we did everything right, we are not going to avoid liability in this setup. But the good news is that Mary's damages are going to be limited, right? She's only going to be entitled, essentially, to recover whatever the emotional distress damages that would be appropriate for having to put up with 3 occasions of inane comments by her manager. And hopefully, if we're an artful manager, a really good leader, we're able to take care of Mary in such a way that we never draw that claim. But if it comes up, you should be able to work through the situation with a very modest outcome. All right, what happens when the coworker is the bad actor, right? We're not talking about a manager here. Well, in that scenario, the employer is going to be liable if it knew or should have known of the sexual harassment and failed to take prompt and appropriate remedial action. Because of that test, it's really important that you make sure you train all of your managers that immediately they must report if they know or should know that there's a potential situation that might start to lead to sexual harassment, right? There's no questions asked. They have to come forward to HR or whomever you designate, and they have to report it. It is mandatory. It is immediate. It is as if I tell managers, it's like you are the eyes and the ears of the president on the ground, okay? When you hear it, when you see it, it's just like the president of the company heard it or saw it. And now we're dealing with a time-sensitive situation because we have an obligation to promptly and appropriately jump in and address the situation. And if you sit on that and go out of town for a soccer tournament for one of your kids, or you go on vacation, you have now compromised our ability to defend ourselves. And in addition, you compromise your own potential risks here as a manager. And we'll talk about that next. Now, when the company or the employer goes in to conduct its investigation, it's clear that they don't have to conduct a CSI-style investigation, but they do have to conduct a good faith-based investigation. They have to be reasonable in all the things that they do. So let's now talk about a manager's individual liability for sexual harassment. Yes, indeed, depending upon the jurisdiction, the manager can be personally liable under certain circumstances. And if in the appropriate jurisdiction, under state law, certainly, the manager can be liable for the sexual harassment or the discrimination, or for aiding and abetting, or for ignoring the unlawful harassment when they knew or should have known of it. They could be individually liable, depending on the jurisdiction, for retaliation. And then there are other intentional tort claims that they could be intentionally liable for too. And I tell folks, it's like, man, I need to arm you with this information, because obviously we want to create this workplace where everybody feels, respected, everybody feels empowered to be the best person they can be. But I also want you to know that we want to minimize liability, and for your own self-preservation, you want to make sure that you're doing all the right things so that you don't get sued too, because that is your house, your paycheck, your car on the line with mine. The remedies that can come up in a case where someone is successful in prosecuting one of these claims: reinstatement, back pay, front pay, emotional distress damages, and depending upon the state law, maybe even punitive damages. All things that are very, very dangerous. So let's talk about bystanders in the workplace. So bystanders are the people in the workplace, your employees, who are on the ground in the moment. They see or they hear the comments or the conduct that's out of step, out of sync, if you will, for the way you want your workplace to be, and they have the creativity and the courage to step up and say something. It would be as if we were in this big business meeting right now, and maybe one of the gentlemen in the room started cracking very sexist jokes, and another one of the gentlemen, he's giggling, he thinks it's hilarious, and nobody in the room, all the other men in the room, nobody steps up, nobody says anything like, oh, that's not appropriate, right? What do the women in the room think? They think, well, everybody must think that way. It must be okay here. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, but that is the perception. So in that scenario, if one of those other folks in the room, whether it's a man or a woman, had the creativity and the courage to go, oh man, knock that off. That's not the way we think. Just stop that. Let's get back to business. That would have been enough to blow some oxygen into the situation and to basically disrupt or interrupt it, so that the situation could return to balance, if you will, and everybody would start behaving appropriately. So I tell folks, it's like, your employees, if you want to go this route, you tell them, it's like, you're not required to be a bystander and step up and say something, but I'm telling you, I'm empowering you and I'm encouraging you to do it. Just be respectful in doing that. And in doing so, you will do more to help create the right tone in my workplace, in our workplace, than any rule that I could ever put out there, right? Now, bystander workplace training actually is something that the EEOC is considering making mandatory for sexual harassment trainings for folks who get into situations where they're under a consent decree with the EEOC when they settle cases. So bystander training is a big deal. It's a great form of training to share with your employees, and just, make them understand they don't have to do it, but it really does go a long way to helping reset the table and restore balance. I tell folks, let's try it on. You've noticed that Mark has made a number of increasingly flirtatious remarks to your friends Nina. She said she was fine handling these comments, but the other night after a conference at a hotel bar, you saw Nina and Mark talking, and while you couldn't hear them, it looked like he was getting way too close, and you thought she looked incredibly uncomfortable. You then saw him touch her lower back a number of times, and he was definitely giving her those suggestive, smoldering looks. What do? In the moment, when you see the lower back touching and leering, do you interrupt them? Well, some people would say maybe, yeah, I'd approach and see if I could, insert myself and get a sense of what's going on. Other people might say, no, I stay out of everybody's business. What would you do? And I tell people, think back to the days when maybe you were in college or you were out of high school and you were out with your buddies, a younger time when you were out drinking with your friends, and maybe, you had a group of friends that you would go out with all the time, to the bars on Friday nights. It was mixed company. And what would you have done if one of the women in that group was being approached by somebody and being hit on somebody that was just classic A number one creepy? And that person in your group was giving you the looks like, save me. You would have jumped in, you would have immediately gone in and interrupted the situation and found a way to get that friend of yours away from the creepy character. Well, now, why do we hesitate now that we're all grown up and we're in the workplace? We shouldn't, right? Because if you go in the situation, if it were me, I'd just kind of, walk right over and insert myself between the two of them and start talking to them. And I'd probably start to turn my back to the woman so that, I could shield her or block her so that she could have the occasion to get up and go to the restroom and call an Uber and get out of there, right? If it ends up that she looks at me and she says, "Oh, Catherine, that's so sweet of you. We're dating. Go away." If that's what she says, I'm okay with that. She's probably really happy because I had her back. And if the guy's upset because I did that, well, you know what? I'm okay with that. If that's the worst thing that happens to me, is that I upset him by intervening and trying to make sure everything was okay, I can live with that. But let's say that in the moment, back to our scenario, in the moment you don't interrupt. And let's say later that night, when you had the opportunity, you didn't interrupt then either. And the next day, you didn't interrupt then either. And as things turn out, maybe a couple months later, you find out that Mark was sexually harassing Nina to within an inch of her sanity, and he had been sexually harassing other women that work for him for a very long time. Is there a little part of your Jiminy Cricket who says, "Wow, Catherine, you should have stepped up. You might have made a difference"? I bet there is. Doesn't mean that you're legally accountable, but sometimes we got to listen to our Jiminy Cricket, right? All right, so expectations for our managers. When they know or should know that there's a problem brewing. And now this kind of knowledge can come to them in all kinds of different ways. You'll see the screen here. It can be an internal complaint. Maybe it's oral, maybe it's written. Maybe somebody says, "Oh my gosh, did you see what so-and-so posted on Facebook?" Maybe it's anonymous. Maybe it's part of an exit interview. In the worst case scenario, it's because you drew a lawsuit or a demand letter or an EEOC charge. But whatever the source, remember, the manager's knowledge is imputed to the company, and so once they know or should know, they have to immediately report it up the food chain to HR or to whomever it is that would investigate these types of claims for you. The manager's responsibilities: number one, listen, don't laugh, don't shrug it off, don't offer opinion. "Oh yeah, man, that does sound like sexual harassment." You do not want to say that. Don't say, "Oh, that's just how Joe is. Don't worry, Joe's always like that. Everybody knows he's harmless." Because what is that? That's basically a statement that the company knows that Joe's, a problem in the workplace, and we've ignored it. Don't suggest that the person has done that to you or to others. Don't discourage the person from complaining. Don't, and here's a big one, don't tell the employee, "You know what, I'm happy to go to HR for you, but I need you to put it in writing first." Because the law doesn't care whether that's put in writing. When that employee comes and shares that information with the manager, that is all that is required. And if you require that employee to put it in writing, you are just causing more time to tick off that clock. You're increasing your risk of liability. And what if that employee never comes back and puts it in writing? If that happens and you never do anything with it, then you've got a real problem. Make sure that you tell the employee that the concerns will be looked into by the appropriate people at the company, and assure the employee that there will be no retaliation. Make sure that no matter how much the employee begs and pleads that you not share the information, you're clear that, "Look, I owe it to you. You're valuable. I owe it to your colleagues. I owe it to my boss. I owe it to the company. We together are going to work on this problem, and you don't have to be afraid of retaliation. You'll be protected from that, but we're going to go together and we're going to report this." And if the employee says, "Oh, I'll go do it myself," you got to follow up and make sure they did. All right. So takeaways for you, for the managers really, is, tell your managers, make sure you're monitoring your own behavior and always setting the right tone for the workplace, because employees will follow their manager's lead. If their manager's lead, if the manager's constantly walking around swearing and cursing like a sailor, dropping F-bombs all over the place, they're going to think it's okay too, right? Make sure that all of your employees, but certainly your managers, understand and reinforce company policy. And you would be surprised. What do you think all your employees would say if you surveyed them and says, "Where are our company policies that prohibit harassment and discrimination in the workplace?" I guarantee you at least 50% of them would say, "I don't know." And you say, "Well, they're in your handbook." And you say, "Where's your handbook?" And they'd say, "I don't know." Okay, so you got to make sure that people know where your policies are, know that they're in a handbook, know how to get them if they need them. Make sure that your managers are reporting complaints and incidents of harassment just as soon as possible. I tell managers all the time, my key is if you must be wrong in good company, right? If you're not sure whether it's problematic, if you're not sure if it might be harassment or discrimination, take it up the food chain to HR, deposit it in their lap so that they can sort through it and make a good decision. Make sure managers understand that they have a duty to cooperate with investigations, and make sure your managers, because they are the eyes and the ears of your company president, that they understand the need to follow up after a complaint is made to make sure that there's no retaliation. All right. That is my story, and I'm sticking to it. I know that we went right up to the hour mark, but for those of you who have any questions, if you want to submit those to your host, certainly we'll collect all of those questions, and we'll be glad to respond to them within a few days here so that we can address any follow-up issues that you might want to raise. Margaret, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. As Catherine had mentioned, we are at time, so if you do have questions, certainly now or certainly after the fact, please feel free to email myself or your Diversified team, and we will be happy to follow up with those answers. On behalf of Diversified Insurance Solutions, ABRC, and Jackson Lewis, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and certainly thank you to Catherine for presenting such a relevant topic. We hope you found much value in the information presented. Just a reminder that I will be sending a recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint presentation to you in the next few days. So thank you for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day.